Mode. Hello everyone and welcome to our 11th episode of SIP Chronicles. Today we have a very good guest with us, Sandro Gauci. How do you pronounce your name?
Sandro?
Gauci. And we have Giovanni and myself, obviously. Just let us run a quick sound check to see if we get an audio. Yep, all good. So we can start. How you been, guys, doing?
Yeah, not bad. It's interesting times, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Things are changing again to the worse. So yeah, keep positive.
Yeah. We'll try to imagine how it will be in, let's say, 5 years.
Yeah.
Can be very different from now.
Yep. Yeah. We'll see. It's hard to predict the future, I guess.
Well, that's probably a topic in its own. But today we have Sandro with us, and Sandro is pretty well known for his efforts to make SIP more secure. And Giovanni, wanna give him a little bit of
introduction?
Yeah.
I mean, you probably, if you are watching us chatting here now, you probably have been in some international conference, and so you know Sandro, and you appreciated his very interesting presentation that he gave many times around the world, particularly last time I think that I saw you in Berlin. But for the person that has just joined us, our industry, let's say that Sandro developed maybe the most famous tool for probing, hacking, penetrating voice over IP systems. And so each time you see in your log files SIPvicious, that's come from the Warcraft of Sandro. And you probably are very angry because of this, or at least I have been many times. But indeed is something useful and interesting too. And this is your occasion to know more, and from one side. And from another side, let's say for the most of us, for the most people that are already inside our industry, now will be the moment for knowing what additional services can Sandro and SIPvicious Pro, the professional, the commercial version, can give to ITSP carriers and enterprises worldwide. So Sandro will speak about both the community edition or the open source edition, the normal one that are around, and the professional, the commercial version of SIPvicious, and many other related voice over IP security things like fuzzing, like penetrating, and like trying to crash your server in many ways, particularly with buffer overflows, etc., etc. But I will leave the floor to Sandro, and maybe you can introduce a little bit for people that doesn't know so much, but that are in our industry in any case.
Thank you, Giovanni. So, yeah, I'm Sandro Gauci, known as the author of Subvicious, which I released back in 2007. It's been a while. And since then, it's kind of taken a thing of it on its own. It's Subvicious is a set of tools that one can use to test their SIP-based infrastructure. So if you have PBX or something like that, you can use Subvicious, any of the tools in Subvicious, to test the security of such infrastructure. And mainly the open source version consists of 3 tools. There's SVMap, which you can use to find SIP entities. And it has various different options, of course. It's very extensive. But yeah, you can search a particular subnet, you can search the whole internet in a short period of time, and find SIP servers, which can then be attacked with the rest of the tools. So there's a second tool called SVWar. And SVWar, what it does is, once you've found those SIP targets, it allows you to enumerate SIP extensions. It allows you to identify which SIP extensions exist on the target server. So you might have a PBX with extension 1000, extension 1001, and so on and so forth. And the attacker or the penetration tester wouldn't know which extensions exist before doing such a test. And it does this by just trying each potential extension, and if there's a different response, then it knows that the extension exists. Whether the extension exists or not depends on the response that it gets. And finally, there is the SV crack, which cracks passwords. And so for each extension that you've found in step number 2, you would, as a pen tester, you would want to try to guess the password. And back in the days, passwords for SIP extensions used to be particularly weak. And that's why I had released these tools to show, hey, you really need to put a proper password. Otherwise, you're in trouble. And so it does password cracking very quickly. You can tell it a range of numbers, for example, since passwords on SIP used to be numeric often. And it will very quickly do the challenge response mechanism in SIP authentication, do it very quickly for different passwords. And when it gets at 200 OK, then it knows that that password is guessed. So those are the main tools. There are 2 additional tools, as vreport for reporting. Not that exciting, but some people liked that. And there was an additional tool called as vcrash that would crash Subvicious, because there was a lot of abuse back in 2012, I think, and a bit later. Subvicious was being abused by being distributed through botnets, being distributed on AWS hosted servers, and so on. And people were just cyber criminals, were just causing denial of service, bringing down SIP providers by distributing these attacks. And so I released a tool called as vcrash that makes it stop, at least temporarily, by sending back a packet to the attackers themselves. And it would exploit an unhandled exception in Subvicious. Giovanni, I did not hear you.
Because I shut my microphone.
Yep.
Is the famous packet of death.
It's kind of a packet of that for Subvicious.
Yeah, and
Okay.
that's also integrated, I think, in SIPgrep by Alexander, maybe. Max, you remember? I'm almost sure. And also, and I think that also Homer is able to send that packet.
Interesting. I wasn't aware that of that. So yeah, and that would exploit an old version of Subvicious to make it stop. The whole point was to get the attackers to stop doing this, first of all, but also to upgrade, which had a fix, so that together with the fix for this crash, it also had additional functionality or feature which would make it stop if there's no response from the target system. Because previously it would, even if this target system, the victim system, did not respond with SIP packets, the tools would keep hammering. And this, of course, was quite wrong, and I wanted to fix this. So yeah, that's, I think, a very, very short version of the Subvicious story and what it does. I had done a presentation back at Kamalia World back in 2016, which spoke about 9 years of Subvicious and how, I get contacted by various different people asking for updates and Subvicious IPv6 support, which we do have now, by the way, and TCP support, which is only available in the Pro version, and so on and so forth. But yeah, what we do is not Subvicious as such. Subvicious is just a tool, the open source version especially, is just a tool that I created while doing pen testing, which is, where our income comes from. So we're especially focused on voice over IP and WebRTC infrastructure. Of course, we do also web application and network infrastructure, because that always comes with any test, really. If you're testing PBXs nowadays have so many different web interfaces and so on. But yeah, we do a lot of, what we do is penetration testing, security testing of target systems. So we cater especially well for vendors. So we have clients who have created SBCs, for example. SBC vendors use our services, and service providers, of course, telcos, CPaaS, that sort of stuff tends to be our area. And we do a lot of tests manually. So penetration testing is not about running a tool per se. And that's why we develop our tools, which are really flexible and allow us to do tests manually, through having different templates, being able to do many different things, send a SIP message and modify the responses that you send to the response that you get according to what you get. And
Yes,
it
but
involves a lot of analysis.
in some way, this that you are describing involves an incredible amount of knowledge I mean, something that you really feel in your fingers when you're at the keyboard, etc. But there is some usage or something that also a person that is much less versed than you and your company, let's say a voice over IP operator or a technician, there is some usage that can be useful to them. For example, I mean, SIPvicious, SIPP. I never understood how to pronounce it. And I mean, you can be a wizard with it and do very complex things. I mean, incredible complex things. But you can also just use it to quickly see how a server keep with some load, just to check it out. And there is some, I mean, not so wizard needed something that is for the common mortal, from the common tech in our industry, that we can use it to do things.
I didn't quite understand the question.
What
Is it a
is
question?
how you can imagine someone that is not so well versed like you or some other security operator to use SIPvicious in our daily job when we run SIP services?
Right. Yeah, so I think the open source version of SIPvicious is, I mean, if you're used to command line, at least it's relatively easy to use, and relatively straightforward in how it's used. We have, in fact, written an article about how to use it against our demo server. You're muted.
If you have a link for that, you can post it.
I will post the link. I will post the link there, and I can also do something like share my screen.
Very, very nice.
So,
very interesting.
Is my screen shared yet?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you see what I'm showing?
Yes.
All right. So this is the article that I'm referring to. Essentially, it walks you through. It's like a getting started guide, if you want.
That's perfect. That was exactly what I was asking for.
Yeah. So this is very recently published. Okay. So this is this year, and first it tells you how to do reconnaissance, which is kind of the first step in many pen tests. Okay, or in many security tests that you might want to do in such cases. So, and we have even a demo server that you can target. So we made this available mostly to test Subvicious Pro, but the open source version, which is totally different from the Pro version, can also work with this. And we show how to use it to first identify the server. So you would run the commands there, and with the VV, with the super verbose options, you get a lot of results. But essentially what's important is this table here, which says, hey, we have the following IP, which you scanned on port 5060, UDP only, is running Camelio. Okay, and this is just looking at the user agent header. That's all, or the server header. It checks for both, I think.
What about
It's
the
been
fingerprint? What is it based off?
fingerprinting. I just removed it. In fact, it's been removed since 2012. But someone filed an issue yesterday or the day before, asking how do you enable it. And I realized, okay, we have to remove it also from the UI. Fingerprinting was a feature that I added back in 2009, I think. Was a very interesting idea based on looking at the order of the headers, looking at how the to tag is generated. Because each SIP implementation has its own way of, generating the to tag and so on. So you can fingerprint these things. But unfortunately, this method just either my method of teaching the tool how to fingerprint, either that was not so good. It just gave so many false positives that I did not find it useful myself anymore. No one ever asked for it. And so, sometimes it's best to disable features that are not being used.
But in general, I mean, there are some pretty good indicators that you can utilize, I suppose. Like for example, if you look even at something like 100 trying, like Camelio and OpenSIPs are generating different default responses for the message.
Of course.
And then even different versions of OpenSIPs, I think they changed it at some point.
That's it, yeah.
So and then when you're looking at something like authorization, that order in which you feel responses are usually very implementation specific, and you can extract a lot of.
I agree. So it's a very interesting area, technically, but I did not find it so useful in my penetration testing. That's the thing. So, decided to not try to fix it and just disable it because no one was asking for it as such. Maybe we will revisit in the future, but I don't see a future for that feature so much. So after identifying what you have as a target, and during our penetration tests, by the way, we often know what targets we have, right? So we often know, hey, our client is running Camelio, OpenSIPs, and behind it, something else, asterisk, free switch, if it's an open source friendly vendor or service provider. And so we don't really need this feature. After that, an attacker might try to identify the extensions that are valid. On our demo server, we have made modifications to the Camelio configuration so that we can enumerate. But nowadays, the open source solutions tend to make it difficult to enumerate extensions. In the case of Asterisk, for example, they have fixed this ages ago. And they kept issuing advisories because there were ways to identify extensions anyway, maybe by looking at the headers or sending malformed SIP messages and getting different responses and so on. But nowadays, I think they are, with PJ-SIP, the channel, they are pretty okay. I don't know about free switch so much in this case, but we still see this vulnerability in some proprietary solutions. So it still is a valid test And of course, if you have a certain configuration in your SBC which enables this sort of thing, then yeah, you want to make sure that you test for this. And if you see that you can get the extensions from SIPvicious as VWAR, then you have a real problem, okay? Because there are other techniques that we implement in the SIPvicious Pro that are, more effective and identifying this vulnerability, which SIPvicious open source cannot identify. So yeah, that's the second step. Third step is you can just copy and paste this command, try to crack the extension 1000, and well, actually not that command. This command is what you need to copy and paste. Because by default, the tool tries to guess passwords between 100 and 999. It does this in 20 seconds. The Pro version, of course, is much, much faster. I can speak about that later. But yeah, if you enable the default method of password cracking, then it will guess it. It's 1500 on this server. And yeah, it's a very effective way to break passwords. This uses the register method, of course, and tries to send a register message over and over again. In this case, it does it really quickly. Yeah, and that works. Now, this is what you can do with the open source version of SIPvicious. Some people have been using it to send invite messages as well by setting the method option. And this has been causing a lot of trouble in some cases. So on certain setups, certain infrastructures, it seems that you cannot do SIP enumeration with register, but other methods allow you to, they have there are ways to use other methods to distinguish between an existing SIP extension and one that does not exist. And some attackers, some cyber criminals have been doing this by using the invite method. And so what happened was if SIPvicious gives you a ring. I had written an article back in 2012 which spoke about this, getting a phone call from SIPvicious. You would get to the... and what's happening is that these cyber criminals, they probably don't know that they are targeting a phone. And so they start sending invite messages. And, people get called in the middle of the night by SIPvicious. And some service providers were really hit. So I think there was the Korean telecom service provider. Lots of people were complaining about this. And I got interviewed back then about this. And I said basically what I think is happening. This is the sort of thing that this is not my hand. This is someone who had this problem, getting a call at some weird hour. I think this might still be happening nowadays, but yeah, it just seems to me to be a misguided attack. So
Cool.
this is...
Yeah, pretty nice. So how do you differentiate between SIPvicious and SIPvicious Pro? What kind of difference?
There are many differences. So SIPvicious Pro first of all, is throughout the years I've been rewriting SIPvicious and never releasing it. Version 2, version 3, whatever. First, I did that in Node, I think. In Python 3 first, actually, with async.io at some point. Then in Node, then started doing it in Go. And the latest version is in Go, and Alfred is helping me, my colleague Alfred. He also works for me. And this has been a proper rewrite, and also lots of different features. So as such, we use, for example, an internal network library that is ours, that allows us to send SIP messages really quickly. It's not SIP specific, so it allows you to build certain logic which is required for SIP, and still keep your sanity, sort of thing, and still keep a certain amount of speed, so that we can do denial of service attacks really well. So I kind of explained the differences here and on the SIPvicious page, where I show the different feature sets. So, for example, the open source version doesn't support TCP or TLS. This is actually, unfortunately, the code cannot support TCP or and TLS due to the design of the code. Okay, so we cannot one would have to rewrite it as such, the way it's written. With SIPvicious Pro, we also support SIP over WebSockets, so we can do stuff that is can work against WebRTC sort of infrastructure. We've used that. We can do SIP flooding really well. In fact, kind of it's too well in many cases. We can rate limit things and so on. So we keep under the rate limit, but still go over the resources, the threshold of the resources. So there's a lot of these different features when it comes to denial of service attacks. Yeah, and then there are other tools, attacks like SIP digest leak, that it's not part of SIPvicious open source. RTP bleed and RTP inject attacks, RTP denial of flooding attacks, where you fill in if you have a recording functionality, say in a voicemail or something like that. We can abuse that by instead of sending a certain small amount of RTP packets, we can send a huge amount of packets in a short period of time. And some recording systems just fill up the hard disk, and you run out of resources. It's an extremely effective attack when it works. Okay, so yeah, that's something that we have implemented there. These features are not yet there. Cross-site scripting as a SIP, using SIP as an injection vector, although we do that during our penetration tests. For example, often you might have a web interface showing who's authenticated, or showing the user agents strings that have been blocked using something like failed open or something like that. And so in that case, you might have a website showing these things, telling you, hey, do you want to reset this IP to remove it from the blacklist? And if you're not escaping or filtering the HTML, then an attacker might send a SIP packet that triggers this blacklist, that has HTML in it, with a user agent that has HTML in it, and gain access to the web application that the administrator is logged into. So that's a problem that we do find quite often when we're testing things like display of call detail records and so on as well. SQL injection attacks, SQL injection attacks through through SIP authentication, for example, that can be interesting. Yeah, and SIP enumeration of anonymous methods, where we have a tool that tries this different SIP methods for a particular extension in some cases, or a random one, and checks what responses you get. Sometimes you have authentication is required for most SIP messages, but certain methods might not require authentication. And we do, surprisingly, we do find that problem. So that's kind of, sometimes it's an SBC configuration, sometimes it's just the software that they're using. It's an interesting problem. We have extensive documentation on the support website. So I should paste that also. And so, yeah, we have the getting started, which is a bit similar to the getting started that I showed for the open source version of SIPvicious. And here we show how to use the different modules in SIPvicious against the demo server. So the demo server can be really useful here. What else do we have? So we have target specification, how to pass, how to connect to TCP and WebSocket targets and test TLS, the different tools, templates, because we support Go templates, so that you can insert your custom headers. You can, let me show the examples here. So you can, for example, this is setting a custom user agent header. We've seen some cases where, for example, servers will look for a particular user agent header because they only want to allow the mobile app from a particular vendor. Or in one case, I'm not going to mention the vendor, it's a commercial vendor, of course. They allow the enumeration of SIP extensions when you specify the particular user agent. So to demonstrate that, we create a template file, which is based on the normal template from SIPvicious Pro, and just add a user agent header over there. And, in this case, you would get the enumeration, extension enumeration. It would be kind of working. Or the cross-site scripting example that I gave before, you might insert a script tag with DSRC pointing to the attacker's site in the user agent header. And then do a password cracking attack just to get the security system to trigger and put this stuff in their database and then display it in some website, and then the attacker gets to load their malicious JavaScript, which of course can do anything then. Anything as the organizer.
Yeah, that's interesting.
This is very effective.
Okay. Yeah.
If you want to reproduce certain buffer overflow sort of stuff, for example, let's say you found that if you put this particular header, you get a crash, then you can also use templates for that to put binary characters, non-printable characters, as shown here. Another thing that we are doing with SIPvicious Pro is automation. So we have a demo, in fact, showing how to use it in a CI/CD environment. Use SIPvicious Pro to test new configuration of, say, Camelio or Asterisk. Would you like me to show that off?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And
So
maybe
this is,
just to make it a little bit better, if you can just present the particular window, not the whole screen. Otherwise,
yep,
we see everything.
that's right. Yeah. Let
So
me
it
see
will
how to
be
do that.
bigger for us.
So how do I do this? Window, and now it's showing. Okay. Before I couldn't do it, but now it's allowing me to do that. That's better. How does this look?
Great.
Yeah? All right.
Perfect.
So, all right. So, yeah, we have been working on automation. And we have a demo here with in our playground area. So we're using GitLab in this case. And as such, this is the Camelio demo. So what we have is a GitLab CI. Anyone who's using a CI to maybe test their new configuration of Camelio, OpenSIPs, anything like that allows you to modify the configuration and then load it up to see if it still works. This might be somewhere where you could plug in SIPvicious Pro. So what we have first is an image, which we created ourselves so that we can insert SIPvicious in there without having to download it every time and so on. I can show what the image looks like. If I go back and go here and go here. So the Docker file is simply based on Ubuntu. It downloads Camelio, extracts it, compiles it, and finally it just copies SIPvicious Pro to a path that it can reach. Okay, so that's very simple. And then what I can show is, if I go back to the GitLab CI file, we have two stages. We have the test stage, which we're interested in, and the deploy stage, which is there just to show that when things work out in the test stage, then deployment can happen. So let me show the test script, which is run.sh. So run.sh is where the interesting stuff happens. We use the set pipe fail so that if any command fails, then it stops from moving on to the next stage. And then what we do is copy the configuration files, start Camelio with that configuration, check if it's running, and then it does two tests in this case. You could, of course, run a lot more tests. You could run them with different options and so on, but we tried to keep it very simple here because I don't want to bore you till midnight. So it does two tests: extension enumerate methods and enumerate extensions on TCP localhost 5060. So let's actually give it a try. So if I go back and go to configuration, and maybe I edit this Camelio configuration. Now this Camelio configuration, it's very simple and fictitious as well. I have never seen such a configuration, but we did this so that it's kind of easy to demonstrate this. So what we have is, if we have a regular expression of allowed extensions, so we have the following allowed extensions, and then if the user part of the SIP URI matches this allowed extension, then it checks if there's a particular header. If that header is set to the right value, then it responds with a 200 OK. If there's not that header, it sends a 404 not found. Now, you might notice that the 404 not found here is lowercase, and this one is uppercase. Now, if I were, now it should be the other way around normally so that it passes. It should be exactly the same, okay? But let's just add an enter there so that we can commit. So since these are different, we're going to check what happens when we commit that. Our CI is going to kick in.
Very cool.
And it's running. We check our test, check out what's happening here. And it's running the tests. The first test, SIP enumerate methods. Let me increase the screen size. Can you still see the screen, or is it? Yep.
It's good, it's good.
Because I cannot see you anymore because I'm hiding, you know. All right, so the first test, SIP enumerate methods, is run by SIPvicious after copying the new configuration and launching Camelio, of course. It checks, okay, if register returns 200, then it will, of course, complain, but in this case, it returns 404, and so on and so forth. None of these responses represent what we think is a security issue, okay? But when it runs the second command, which is here, SIP enumerate extensions, then it notices that the response reason phrase is different when it tries different extensions. And so it realizes, hey, we can actually do SIP extension enumeration, and it found all the extensions that we had configured. Now, if I show you a previous job that passed, I'll go back. Apparently not this one. This one. You'll see that when it does successfully return, it goes on and kills Camelio and doesn't complain, and effectively moves on to the next stage, which is to deploy. So in this case, it skipped the next stage because it failed. And that's a very effective way, I think, to use security tools in general, to test your setup continuously without, for every change that you do. Sometimes it's, in this case, it's just, a lowercase letter that can introduce a new security issue. Sometimes you might introduce a new header, and so on and so forth. So there are various different cases, and if you're constantly changing configuration, then this could be an interesting way to try to at least detect some of these vulnerabilities that you might introduce.
Nice. Do you need? Yes, you need some SIPvicious Pro, right, to run those tests.
We only did this for Subvicious Pro. It's doing different exit codes, so that's how we're doing it. It's kind of we are implementing also other methods to get results in Subvicious Pro. Now, Subvicious Pro, we're making it available to our clients as such and to beta testers who have subscribed, and we're making sure that we check who we're making it available to, and we have a special license for that. But right now we are not charging for it, so we're looking for beta testers. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it would be
And
interesting. Yeah. Go ahead, Giovanni.
no. You stay on the tech side. I was about to asking something about the business side, the business model, etc. But you go, Max.
Oh yeah. Okay. I'll finish with that. I guess it would be interesting to see if we can integrate some of those tests. We have pretty good. Let me probably share some of it with you. We've been running pretty good kind of cross open source tool pipeline running on Travis for the past 5 or so years. So it would be interesting to see if we can extend it, also do some of those security testing as well. I just show some of it. Yes. So yeah, we're basically testing bunch of different different scenarios between. Have some diagram here. Just. Yeah, so we basically hook up like OpenSIPs, Camelio, WizardP proxy, and sending calls through from one end to another, and we check number of things that make sure that everything went as expected. So it's been running pretty good, as I said. And we can definitely look at integrating. You see, we test bunch of different versions and branches for each of them. So if we can also do some fuzzing or something cool, would be interesting.
So fuzzing, in fact, is something that in the past we kept it separate from Subvicious Pro, just because we were experimenting so much that we didn't want to pollute Subvicious Pro with usability problems as such. However, we're right now adding fuzzing to Subvicious Pro based on our past experience with Gasoline. Fuzzing is something that vendors ask us for and so on, and this is something that we really need to put in there because it's really, really useful. Like we found out last time in OpenSIPit, for example, you're testing one thing with fuzzing and then you find a vulnerability or crash in something totally else just because
What is, by the way, your experience about OpenSIPit that we did? Was it useful, or how did you find it?
It was useful. It was really cool because from our end, one, we could try, our tool set against the latest interesting things and see if we're on track or not. So that's very valuable for us. And two, we could see that people, everyone needs to kind of work together if we want to get this working. Like new things like the SHA support for the authentication, the support digest authentication with the SHA or with SHA, or with stir shaken. It was a bit frustrating, but on the other hand, you realize, oh yeah, it's not just us who are struggling with this stuff, but even these people who know their stuff, know their how it's
Yeah,
going.
we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Um,
But
how do
we're
you
all
think?
learning, right?
Yeah. How do you think, like, not related to this, but something that you speak previously? How do you think the whole industry changed in the past like 5 to 10 years? I mean, with regards to like we have more and more like open source has infused in the telecom world, right? Was it your experience, or do you still see a lot of proprietary tools in your deployments?
We are so back in the days we used to do mostly proprietary with the occasional open source, some freedom fighting companies. But now we're doing more and more open source. Maybe it's, I don't know, I have a limited point of view, so I can't really say if it's the industry or if it's our set of clients. Kind of, we're having more open source sort of clients than we did before because of our presentations and publications in open source conferences. What I can say is that I like working with open source much more than proprietary, but proprietary sometimes pays better. So it's it's a mixture.
Oh yeah, cool. Thanks,
But
Giovanni. Do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yes, and I want for myself and for our for the people that is watching us, if you can, I mean, I'm sure it's on the website, but if you can describe how is the commercial model for using SIPvicious Pro? Is some subscription, so recurring, or is only when you do consultation, or please?
so right now it's mainly only when we do consultation and beta testers, which is not a commercial model at all. There is a limitation, of course. We set a limit on a date limit. So we usually give access to Subvicious Pro for 6 months. In the future, we're considering subscription models, okay, because they are very interesting, of course. It's very useful for our clients who use us for our penetration testing, because when we find security issues, it's usually much easier to provide them with access to Subvicious Pro so that they can reproduce the security issues themselves, add it to
Like
their
a regression test for
add
penetration.
it to regression testing, and so on and so forth. So that's how we've been using it mostly. But yeah, in the future, we would like to make it available as subscription model. We might also OEM it in if there's such opportunities. So we're still at a relatively early stage when it comes to that area. But we're definitely not giving it away for free, like like the open source version. We learned it the hard way.
Yeah, well, at least some. I hope to see some of the part of it being released. Might be useful for us to integrate into our own continuous integration systems.
Just for my curiosity, but there is some way because you thought that now there is a 6-month license that then expires, and then you will want to trade a subscription model or things like that. And there is a way to do that. I mean, Go is a uh, self-contained executable, and do it check with the server. I mean, how you can manage this expiration date, etc. Maybe it's something standard that I don't know about.
We have internal code to do that, just like traditional software, right? Would have an expiration, and in the case of traditional software, it would require a new license or something like that. In our case, we make a special build for each of our
Okay.
users. So each user gets a special build.
You can know which one is doing what.
Yeah. It's part of our license agreement as well. So there's the technical side, and there's the legal side, which they have to work together. It's tricky, of course, and I mean, we're looking at different options how to provide Subvicious Pro, not necessarily in this way, but also possibly in other ways using platform sort of service, SaaS sort of thing, and so on. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so we had in our carnet of things to speak about, and we are running short on time now. But I can get back to our talking point, and this SIPvicious modeling and fuzzing. And you already spoke about fuzzing, at least a little bit, and about the modeling of SIP header.
Sure. So
But it was that part about the proprietary, I mean the X headers that you were talking before, like the one that.
I didn't quite
Yeah,
understand.
by the way, read your posts. Thank you, Sandro, for doing all that. It will be, by the way, it would be cool if you can, if you'll have some time, maybe create some blog post on OpenSIP with thing. But again, it's up to you.
Yeah, it's works in progress. I didn't start yet, but it's there in on the list of articles to write.
He seems enjoying doing it. I'm not a writer myself. Giovanni is, right? Giovanni, we can write stuff.
No, we have. I'm slowly going through the
heap of
blog posts that we need to get out there, and one of the next ones actually is about OpenSIPit. I'd like to write about what sort of things we saw and what sort of things we tested and wanted to test but didn't, and so on and so forth. It could be interesting. So that's one thing. Another thing, we have a blog post about SNGrep, not SNGrep itself, but more like how we reproduced the crashes that we found, and now they are fixed. We will publish that. The zip header smuggling. It spoke about the Camaleo issue that was fixed, but also I tried to make it more generic than Camaleo because we did find this sort of stuff in proprietary SBCs, and it's been worse in such cases. So you could smuggle more interesting headers than in the case of Cameleo. In the case of Cameleo, it was only the special headers, which is in some cases a big deal. Some cases it's not a big deal. So that's the whole thing. But yeah, with proprietary systems, we have seen using different, not using white spaces, but using other characters. We have seen similar situations where one attacker could smuggle through an SBC headers that are used for internal purposes or are also standard headers in some cases. And what's interesting about this is that it's not only about inserting certain characters, but sometimes it's also about inserting multiple headers with the same name, for example. Some implementations might take the first header, some implementations might take the second header. And when you exploit that sort of difference, then that's interesting, right? Because the SBC might check the value of the first header, while the say media server or something like that, you have an asterisk inside, which is receiving traffic from the SBC, the SBC is receiving traffic from potential attackers. If the asterisk server here interprets the second instance of such header, then that might be a problem if such header has security implications. This is all very custom in many cases, but it's very interesting for certain providers, and we have seen that. So that's what I had in mind when writing such a blog post. And we found these security issues by making use of fuzzing techniques, custom fuzzing. So not just launching your standard, fuzzer, which sends malicious SIP messages that are just malformed, but you have to target a particular header and tell the fuzzer, hey, mess with this particular header, and you have to identify such problems. You have to also observe the other side to see what's happening, to identify such a problem in lab environment. If you want to identify such a problem in non-lab environment, in the real world, it's kind of much harder. You have to somehow get, see different results, right? So maybe the response is different and so on and so forth. But such tests can involve so many different SIP messages that such responses can get lost because, at least in my case, we always ended up looking at the responses manually or at the traffic manually to identify the interesting stuff. Because, how do you train a tool to look for such things?
You can call this like a hybrid artificial human intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, with AI, you could maybe do something like that, but that's, I mean, I'm not into buzzwords, so.
Yeah, well, at some point there might be some ways to integrate it.
Well, definitely there's a lot of security companies not working in RTC, but working in the web application areas and so on that are trying to integrate
By the
some
way,
of these
Sandra,
buzzwords.
are you using some known libraries for the Fuzzing, or is it all
It's all ours. So we have built our own SIP library. We have built our own network sort of logic library. We call it NetLoop. It's by definition what it does. Our own RTP libraries, and so on and so forth. Of course, we did not implement our own codecs for Opus especially. So we kind of, for Opus support, we link to Opus from Go. But otherwise, yeah, we did a lot of stuff ourselves simply because we need speed and we need flexibility. We need to be able to send malformed stuff when we want to, but we need to make it very fast. We need to make it also correct in most cases without
I guess you
having
need
limitations.
You need some specific. You have some specific requirements, criteria. But anyway,
It's a lot of code.
Part of header smuggling. I was I don't know if you guys seen that on the mailing list, but I was pretty disappointed by response from from Camellia community. But yeah,
I knew this was coming.
I was
Maxim.
hoping that you will not touch this.
I knew this was coming.
But I think it's a learning curve in a way. I guess as those projects get bigger and more popular, they will need to learn how to treat security.
Well, I mean, from my part, I took my time. I think a couple of weeks or a month passed until I wrote my blog post. It took me some time, to be honest with you, to go through all the whole thread and try to understand, to summarize what people are saying. I, of course, misinterpreted some cases and misquoted some others. So sorry about that again. I apologized a number of times, but I think I still have some important points that I made in my blog post.
Absolutely.
What was it called? It was called The Great Camellia Security Debate and Some Misconceptions Debunked. So yeah, that was fun in a way, but also kind of tricky to deal with.
But we'll see.
I want to be invited again to Camellia World in the future, so please.
No, you will. I don't think anything will be remembered better about this. Yeah, we'll see how the next year goes. I mean, some people are still hoping. I've seen some announcement from ClueCon. They're looking for sponsors or something, so they're hoping to have ClueCon real.
Of course.
Which is a little bit iffy in my view, but it's for them to decide.
Yeah, it's a risk, right? So.
Yeah, and just in general, how do you discover this? Was it just running some tests, or did you browse the code? What was how did you came about that smuggling issue?
The smuggling issue was found through setting up a lab environment similar to our clients. I think I even used the same version in this case. And simply doing fuzzing, adding logging, and observing what's happening. What, in this case, it was a Camellia SBC or frontend and an asterisk. You could call it backend or media servers. So doing that sort of thing, adding debugging, fuzzing this header, I actually went full on, not expecting to find that white spaces would be the way to do it. So kind of it was strange. But then I just, after doing this fuzzing, I just went through all the characters and found out, okay, this is passing through and it's being interpreted in a certain way, not being removed. And it's arriving on the asterisk end. So yeah, that's how I found it. Other vulnerabilities, we do find them through source code review manual in many cases. There's a lot of tools, of course, that start flagging certain functions that one might use, but yeah, the manual stuff is not to be underestimated.
Do you do a lot of that, or who's doing those code reviews?
Not too much, but increasingly we've been doing more and more code review than in the past. So these last 2 years, yeah, we've been reading more and more code than having fun.
Yeah, well, you could actually, one thing that you could probably, as an idea, when you're doing those code review, a lot of those projects, at least open source ones, have integrated run of static analyzers. So you can one of starting point, you can actually look at the output of those static analyzers and see if you can spot any unfixed issues that can be exploited in one way or another.
Yeah. Well, our approach is usually to use different methods at the same time. So, fuzzing is actually pretty effective somehow, even though you would expect it not to be. But even, if you use a fuzzer A this month and you use fuzzer B next month, you might find completely new stuff just because the world, works that way. So yeah, it's a very effective way. We find vulnerabilities while developing Subvicious. So we make some mistake in our own code and we realize, oh, whoops, something is happening on the other on the target server. That's kind of funny. I can't give any specific examples right now, but yeah, this is something that happens. That's how I found, for example, the SIPdigest leak vulnerability. I was trying to reproduce another vulnerability that was harder to reproduce. It's very related to the SIPdigest vulnerability, leak digest vulnerability. These people from a French technical university had published some paper how to abuse invite messages to to send to get it to do a re-invite and then challenge the re-invite and so on and so forth. And then based on that, you can use the response that you get from the victim in your own invite and commit fraud, toll fraud. So this was really difficult to try to reproduce. But while trying to reproduce this, I realized that I could challenge. Well, I realized I ended up challenging a buy message just because my code wasn't checking the SIP.
And you got response, right?
And I got a challenge response, and I realized, oh crap, this actually works with the buy, and it's so much easier to exploit it to then do offline password cracking at very high speeds with the GPU nowadays. You can do that. So yeah, that's a huge problem. That's an example of finding an exploit or a security vulnerability, a generic one in this case, because it works across so many different systems, by mistake. And lots of other security professionals can say the same. Over beers and so on, you start hearing these really weird stories.
Yeah. By the way, apart from the SIP scene, do they also participate in like kind of security scene? Or I've been enjoying watching actually some of those conferences like DEF CON, CCC, and it's usually pretty interesting.
So I used to do a lot of security conferences, yeah. But it's been some years now since I've presented at a public security conference. Mainly, I guess, our target market is the real-time communications world, and going to the security conferences. Well, there was a time where I was, one time I was coming back from, I think, Malaysia or somewhere in Asia, back to London, and then going back to my flat, showering, and going back to the airport to take a flight to Chicago, I think, to some other security conference. So there was a time where I was doing this really excessively. But it's tiring, and these people, they like to drink too much, and yeah, it gets a bit too much. Now I have a family, and so I stick to the voice over IP and real-time communications crowd a bit more than
our
previous.
industry is so healthy.
It's not that much healthier, but it's.
I have also
conferences, security
another
conferences.
couple of questions, so we can then wrap up also because it's very late. And one question is, you hinted that you're doing also work in WebRTC, and it can be fun if you can tell us some of the things that you saw in this mixed web things that probably there are more. I mean, I can imagine that there are more security failure in that kind of world, just because they are not used to interact with RTC. This from one side. This is one question. So, what happens as security failures into the WebRTC things that you saw? And the other things is a little bit more trivial, but I see that you have the same chair like Max, or at least they seems to be the same. what model it is? Because maybe it's so nice that I must have one.
Well, the chair. I really don't know exactly, but it's an IKEA, yeah. IKEA
Okay.
standard. My furniture tends to be
I will
IKEA
check
based.
it out in the next installation of the Five Tribe.
It's not amazing, but
Yeah, it does the job, I guess.
it does the job. Yeah. I've been considering getting something a bit more appropriate for someone who spends so much time sitting down. Maybe I will invest in a desk that goes up and down so that I can stand and pretend
That's nice.
to be
That's
here.
actually it's very nice when you put on the under treadmill to walk.
Yeah.
So you can walk pretty fast, and I was doing that, and you really can do a lot of work. At least half of the work you can do when you're really pushing in working. Because all reading and a lot of writing, you can do it.
Cool. Cool. So for your first question, WebRTC. Yeah, we've been doing WebRTC things, of course. I think the major vulnerability that we found was the one that we published about Slack. Slack Stern servers, we could abuse them to allow us to connect to their local servers and reach the AWS meta server through the Tern server, because Tern servers are effectively proxy servers. So that's their feature, that's their functionality. And if you have a Tern server as a provider in a WebRTC environment, you kind of need that. And Slack actually use it as for all their, or used to at least, last time I checked, used to use it for all their SRTP. So it's a critical part of their infrastructure. If you're not making sure that the Tern server only allows connections to specific IPs, then if you're effectively allowing attackers to abuse your Tern servers to connect anywhere, including your internal systems. And lots of internal systems, unfortunately, require no authentication. They check just that the IP address maybe is localhost in some cases, and give access to administrative interfaces, for example. Cotern itself used to have a telnet server that allowed it to be configured. It used to be automatically on and allowed access to 127.0.0.1 to the local host, so without authentication. So Cotern now have fixed a lot of these things, and it comes with default rules to prevent abuse and so on. But of course, lots of service providers did not, back then when we exploited it, they did not have this protection in Cotern by default. You could enable it, but yeah. So we found this first at one of our private clients years back. I think in my blog post I give some timelines, in fact. Let me see when we found that originally. In 2017. Then we found this in Slack and reported it through their bug bounty. Then we published our report and realized, oh, we should have checked out the other bug bounties because other people are writing tools also to exploit this vulnerability. So we dedicated some time to go through all the bug bounties that might have Tern servers, and we issued a report eventually about all of this for bug bounties that allowed us to publish this information. Otherwise, we anonymized it. So we found different service providers, I think at least 3 or 4 service providers which had this particular vulnerability. Another vulnerability that we found, now this is a kind of a generic vulnerability, a vulnerability that a friend of ours had actually found was that Jitsi for Docker, the Jitsi Docker Compose image, used to come with default passwords, which allowed administrative access actually to the XMPP servers. Some sort of administrative access. So our friend got it fixed, but we also realized that this affects some other bug bounties. So we actually reported that and did a blog post. First we did the blog post and then we found it in bug bounties. So, we had some past experience with Jitsi. So this was familiar territory, but not Jitsi for Docker. So this was cool. What else? We've done private work for CPaaS sort of providers that provide WebRTC SDKs and environments. And there we've tested a lot of things with custom signaling protocols based on top of WebSocket. And there you find the good stuff because this is kind of perhaps tested from a normal security researcher, internal pen tester point of view, but not from someone who has experience with RTC. So you start seeing similar vulnerabilities that you might see on SIP on WebRTC because they've implemented their own signaling protocol. So that's interesting. Lots of denial of service, of course. So you might have parser issues there found through fuzzing on signaling. But moving away from signaling, we also have seen misuse of the TLS, denial of service in the TLS, like sending lots of the TLS packets across different ports and just getting the media servers to reboot or something like that. We've seen even with a proprietary SBC vendor, I hope that they fixed it. We've seen we were fuzzing stun, for example, and which is one of the protocols used very much in WebRTC environments. And so we were to fuzz stun. We were starting a call, then sending lots of stun messages, and then starting another call, and so on. And each stun message would be malformed. And we realized that one particular malformed message, or more than one, would crash the media server. So
Oops.
that's it. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting stuff. It's stuff that you would see in other areas, especially in traditional voice over IP, that you might see also in WebRTC environments. I mean, I could talk a lot about these things, but I cannot give specific details unless we have published things. Like Slack also were using Janus, and they were using an old certificate that Janus used to have as a default certificate with a private key that was public as well. So that was interesting, an interesting vulnerability that Slack also fixed. Of course, these issues that I speak about publicly are all fixed. We don't we try to do responsible disclosure where we can, and where we cannot, we don't disclose as such. That's what we try to avoid trouble.
Cool. Just quick question on the business side. Is it just you and Alfred, or do you guys have more people working?
So we're the two main people. In the past, we used to also work with other people, good experienced pen testers, especially when it comes to some other areas like web applications and network infrastructure. When we have too much work, we get help. We also join other pen test companies from time to time, but not so much anymore. When they need specialized people, specialized in what we do. So RTC security. We don't have a lot of competition in that area. in terms of, expertise. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Security, we have so big market, right? But the number of security experts working in this space is pretty small.
Well, Max, something that I'm going to talk about is offensive security in our industry. There's the TAD summit soon, and I should be preparing a presentation for that on this very topic, because I think it would be beneficial if actually there is more offensive security done in the real-time communications world. Why? Because simply taking a defensive approach by just implementing, creating security policies without actually having tested them tends to create the wrong, in some cases, the wrong solutions. So it's very, very easy to find security solutions that create security problems that one can bypass, that don't work as intended. So I really think we need more security tools, more offensive security expertise. I'd like to see more people work in this area, because obviously me and Alfred, we cannot do it all, and there's a lot of different approaches that one can take, right? So I'm not that happy that we don't have so much competition, actually, to be honest with you. In fact, I'd rather have more people work in this area to have more secure RTC. WebRTC does come with a lot of, things that are good. It does come with encryption by default, and the people working on the WebRTC stack, they seem. I mean, there's been vulnerabilities, of course, and across the years, but yeah, that's not where we're personally seeing the problems. We're seeing the problems in the infrastructure side, in the custom protocols, and so on. So there's a lot more than it seems to be when it comes to RTC security. And it's an exciting world because it's real time, right? So yeah, denial of service is a big thing, whereas in other areas, maybe crashing something is not a big deal. In RTC, crashing even one system, sometimes it's a big deal, because you need to find out that that system crashes other systems sometimes, and so on and so forth. So we've seen a lot of such things.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. All right, I think Giovanni is eager to get going.
Time
So-
for
Yeah, I
Prancer.
mean the things is I think that we touched all the bases, and what is so fascinating for me is I mean all this whole world of security, etc. And I will ask the stupid question. I easily imagine that there are some group that is trying to do toll fraud and then resell traffic or do traffic to their own for pay numbers and things like that. And so from one side, reselling traffic, and from the other side, generating revenue and calling 199 or whatever. And what other kind of, let's say, aim have attackers? I mean, maybe a ransom or. I mean, I know it's a little bit movie style, but I mean, it's interesting.
Are you asking what
What
other than
motivation?
toll fraud, what else is there?
What motivation they have?
Right. It's hard for me to answer that question, because I'm not working with the forensics people or with the incidents response people. So I can only guess. But definitely, I mean, ransomware is a big thing right now, and similar things, getting getting threats that your system is going to be crashed for a period of time if you depend on that system can be a big deal. So denial of service is one of the things that, yeah, I think a lot of our clients are really afraid of, and for good reason, because whenever they had that sort of thing, it meant direct losses in revenues. So that's definitely one thing. Like you mentioned, toll fraud is a big deal, of course, that leads to income immediately. I think as we're all finding out, everyone is working from home and so on. Now, in my case, I've been working from home for a long time, but most people have not, and so their communications are kind of becoming more and more available on the internet, and more, sensitive information as well goes through. So yeah, definitely there is some element of espionage, and I don't mean it in a paranoid sort of way. It's more like part of doing business. So larger enterprises and so on, they have teams of people who are taking care of incident response and forensics. Simply, and they have a full-time job doing this, and this is a whole team sometimes, because they have real problems to take care of. Um, you hear about the Chinese and the Russians. I mean, this is what it's about, right? It's about partially espionage, because information is powerful. And yeah, so that's, I think, the third case that I can imagine. And I mean, if you're a service provider in our world, in the RTC world, the sort of information that goes through you is kind of everything, right? So yeah, with everything you get the boring stuff and you get the interesting stuff as well. Like recently, one big provider had some Elasticsearch server, call detail records and interesting data about the calls themselves. I still have to actually check out what's being published about this. I don't have first-hand experience, but it's one of the examples, right? And there's thousands of examples.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yep.
Cool. So what you said you're going to speak at the TOD Summit, right? The next thing. What other conferences in the pipeline? Where are we going to see you, Sandro?
That's it. I think that's enough for now.
Okay. One day at a time.
I need to get some work done as well.
Oh yeah.
Lots of work actually to do.
Well, I guess thank you very much for stopping by. Unless we have anything else to discuss, we can probably wrap up. And yeah, let's keep in touch with regards to OpenSIPit. I hope to do the next iteration somewhere in January 2021. So hopefully we will see you and Alfred around doing some fuzzing and whatnot.
Sounds good. Looking forward.
Yeah. And definitely, anytime you have anything interesting going on, give us a buzz. We'll be happy to have you around for a chat at our video scene here.
Thank you, Maxim, and thank you, Giovanni. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
It was very, very interesting. I think that if we find out a way to vehiculate this installation of SIP Chronicles, I mean, many people will be interested. I mean, many people in our little village is not exactly millions, but
yeah. Well, it is what it is. Right. Well, have
Sounds
a good
good.
good night, gents. And yeah, we'll be in touch definitely on everything. And,
All
yeah.
right. Good morning to you and good evening, Giovanni.
Bye
Ciao.
bye. Ciao.